before I go deeper into this issue of religion's truth, I just want to illustrate how confused a person must be to argue that it is reasonable to believe in God because religion is useful, because it gives life meaning, because it makes people more moral than they otherwise would be, as the rabbi suggested, because it makes people happy, any of the benefits you could imagine of religion. Okay, imagine you're walking down the street and you run into an old friend, and he looks radiantly happy. You ask him what's going on in his life, and he tells you that everything changed for him the day he realized that he was destined to marry Angelina Jolie. It might occur to you to ask, why does he believe this? I mean, Angelina Jolie is, after all, one of the most beautiful and famous people on the planet. She's not incidentally married to Brad Pitt. They have something like 27 children at this point. Okay, what if your friend, sensing your skepticism, said, you clearly don't understand. This belief gives my life meaning. Okay, I now know my purpose in life. It's to be Angelina's husband. What if your friend said that this belief has made me a better person? I'm now incredibly kind to children, anticipating having to raise Angelinas once Brad leaves. Or what if your friend said to you, you can believe whatever you want, but I wouldn't want to live in a universe where I don't marry Angelina Jolie. Okay, it should be quite clear at this point that your friend has lost his mind. Okay, and it's probably a dangerous person, and yet this is precisely the kind of talk that so often passes for wisdom in religious circles and may attempt to pass for wisdom here. Certainly the morality argument is of that sort. And no one, I think, you just imagine India. Is it possible that they believe, the billion Hindus in India at the moment, that they alone, among all the world's people, well, they could probably build me a better remote, there's no doubt about that. I would consider the unique features of Mormonism, which may play some role in the next presidential election. Mormonism, it seems to me, objectively, is just a little bit more idiotic than Christianity is. It has to be. It is Christianity plus some very stupid ideas. For instance, the Mormons think that Jesus is going to return to earth and administer his 1,000 years of peace at least part of the time from the state of Missouri. Now, why does this make Mormonism objectively less likely to be true than Christianity? Because whatever probability you assign to Jesus' coming back, you have to assign a lesser probability to his coming back and keeping a summer home in Jackson County, Missouri. Well, what if someone wanted to torture all conscious beings to the point of madness? How could you ever prove that he's not as good as you are? Okay, I mean, this is the kind of email I get. Okay. It turns out to denigrate the Taliban at a scientific conference is to court controversy. And so after I spoke, another speaker came up to me and said, well, how could you ever say that the compulsory veiling of women is wrong from the point of view of science? And I said, well, okay, the moment you link questions of right and wrong to questions of human well-being, then it seems pretty clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing well-being, and therefore not a good practice. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. I said, okay, well, let's just make it easier. Let's imagine we found a culture that was removing the eyeballs of every third child. Okay, would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said, it would depend on why they were doing it. Okay. So that after I picked my jaw back up off the floor, I said, okay, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness or some such nonsense. Okay. And you'll be pleased or horrified to know that she just bit the bullet here and said, then you could never say that they were wrong. People begin to worry, well, what about all the good moods? I mean, can you still love people while viewing them as part of this vast fabric of causality? And I find that there is no sacrifice to the good stuff. I mean, it's not, first of all, things have to be sort of situationally appropriate. I'm not constantly looking at my daughter thinking about she's just a part of the physical universe and wow, neurotransmitters giving rise to all this cuteness. I mean, that's not the mode I'm in. I apologize for the cartoonish nature of this image of Muhammad, but quality images are difficult to come by at the moment.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that you could have made precisely the same. I'm speaking to you, I forgot your name, Charles from Templeton, right here. You could have made precisely the same comment, simply changing a single word from God or a personal God to Poseidon. And without any change in sense, really. And I've said this before publicly, and Richard Dawkins has said more times than he cares to count, I'm sure, that everyone knows what it's like to be an atheist with respect to Zeus. We all reject Zeus out of hand. We would resist mightily any encroachment into public policy that tried to constrain scientific research out of deference to the Iliad and the Odyssey or any other Zeus worship. And you could say no scientific study has ruled out the existence of Poseidon. And yet this analogy, which I'm now drawing between Poseidon and the personal Christian God or the Jewish God or the Muslim God, really strikes theists, Christians, Jews, and Muslims as a total non sequitur. So as an aside, I might say that I now get hate mail from people who actually believe in Poseidon, which is, quite a surprise. I mean, Richard and I confidently trot out this analogy, saying, we all know that Poseidon doesn't exist. Christians or Jews or Muslims like yourself think it a totally spurious analogy, and yet, that the hate mail comes pouring into my email box from neo-pagans who I've been called a racist for denying the validity of these religious beliefs.
Hi, thanks for that. That was great. My question's hypothetical, but I think it's rather plausible. What should we, and I said we as a global community, maybe rational members of the global community, do in the event of a faith-based nuclear attack? And perhaps take the position of a hypothetical president of the United States. How would you address that?
What?
And maybe also speculate how President Obama or President Romney, God forbid, how they may. You've speculated on them. But
What should we do?
How would you respond
in the aftermath of a faith-based nuclear attack?
And not a nuclear 9/11, I guess.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the faith part is not particularly relevant once the bombs have actually fallen. I used to be in the habit of saying that undoubtedly there's a Tiger Woods of compassion out there. For obvious reasons, that analogy doesn't work so well at the moment.
Dan Dennett and I were at a meeting of atheists, an atheist convention actually, about a month ago. And I had the good sense at that meeting to stand up in front of 500 of the most committed atheists in the country and say that atheism as a philosophy was bankrupt and as a word was disastrous, and we should not use the term. This had more or less the effect that any social scientist in this room could have warned me about. I think this was the only talk I had ever been to that began with a standing ovation and ended with some scarcely mammalian sounds of disgruntlement. Incidentally, Dan's talk began with a standing ovation and ended with one, and I noticed that conduces to a better mood later in the evening. If you pay attention, you can see that you no more author the next thing you think than the next thing I say. Thoughts simply appear in consciousness. What are you going to think next? What am I going to say next? I could suddenly start
talking about why we don't eat owls. Why don't we eat owls? They seem perfectly good. Okay, now, where did that come from? Okay, it came out of nowhere as far as you're concerned, but the same thing is happening in your own mind at this moment. I mean, you've all made an effort to be here tonight, presumably because you wanted to hear what I had to say about free will, and now you're trying to listen to me, but you also have a voice in your head that says things. Haven't you noticed? And it says things. It says things that are completely unconstrained at times by the thing you're trying to focus on. I mean, I'm standing up here trying to reason with you, and you will think he does look a little like Ben Stiller. They're vegetarian. Now, I'm obviously not saying that Dr. Craig or all religious people are psychopaths and psychotics, but this to me is the true horror of religion. Okay, it allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay. But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic. And religion is a nearly useless term. It's a term like sports. Now, there are sports like badminton, and there are sports like Thai boxing. Okay, and they have almost nothing in common apart from breathing. Now, there are sports that are just synonymous with the risk of physical injury or even death. I mean, there's sports that are just synonymous with violence. Now, if you get injured playing badminton, you're just embarrassed. Okay, you can add any metaphysics you want.
Thank you.
In that, by that means. I mean, I can say, I see you as a reincarnate personality, and I think you were probably
I was someone famous
on Atlantis. Yes,
they'll make me like a washerwoman in a
people do this all the time. I mean, you can broadcast. I mean, this is constrained by our common sense in every other domain of discourse. I mean, just take, for example, the people who think Elvis is still alive. Okay, what's wrong with this claim? I mean, why is this claim not vitiating our academic departments and corporations? I mean, I'll tell you why, and it's very simple. We have not passed laws against believing Elvis is still alive. The problem is that whenever somebody seriously represents his belief that Elvis is still alive in a conversation, on a first date, at a lecture, at a job interview, he immediately pays a price.
Yeah.
He pays a price in ill-concealed laughter.
Right. Now, surely you can agree with him.
That is a good thing. Then he could rattle on about this is not a scientific claim. This is a matter of faith. You know, when I look at you, I see you might be Elvis. I mean, he could do this. That point of not knowing what happens after death is what worries me about this conversation. I've been very worried about this, that all of you have given up a perfectly serviceable Tuesday evening only to hear the four of us tell you every which way that we have no idea what happens after death. Well, I expressed the spirit of my wife, and she was actually able to put me at ease. I'm worried, obviously, about boring all of you, and she said, "Nothing Hitchens does is ever boring." So I have that going for me. Right.
Yeah, he said in his final address, he said, we've taken out tens or 10,000 terrorists, and I'm sure most of them, or if not all of them, were ones who believed in the Koran. That seems like an awful lot if you're just saying this is the fringe.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the fringe. I mean, the problem is, it is...
The fringe is probably just the people who are actually violent?
Well, I mean, so there's again, the last time we were here, and this is where, we'll begin saying things that will piss off people, and if Batman were here, he would call us a racist. Jainism is the core principle of Jainism is nonviolence. Gandhi got his nonviolence from the Jains. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about you. Okay. It is. This is. Jain extremists are actually they are paralyzed by their pacifism. Jain extremists they can't take their eyes off the ground when they walk lest they step on an ant. They filter every sip of water through cheesecloth lest they swallow and thereby kill a bug. I mean, needless to say, what it does give you a rationale for is ceaselessly worshiping the perfect being who has given you this mediocre book. And this is a photo of Muslims in Kashmir worshiping at a shrine believed to contain a single beard hair from the Prophet Muhammad. Now, in showing you this image, I don't actually mean to denigrate the positive emotions that can be associated with this kind of practice. I mean, I think devotion is a positive emotion that we want in our lives. And I certainly don't mean to make light of how difficult life undoubtedly is for Muslims in Kashmir. But it seems to me patently obvious, given the challenges that they face and that we all face in creating a world worth living in, these people have something more important to do than worship the beard hair of a man who may well have been a schizophrenic. The Catholic Church could talk about physics. It could say, well, we're actually interested in the physics of the transubstantiation, or the physics that allows the Holy Ghost to be here and there and everywhere all at once. But there's not a physicist alive who would have to take those utterances seriously. Okay, I'm saying that if you talk that way, you don't get invited back to the physics conference. Speaking more generally, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are founded on the claim that the Bible and the Quran were dictated by the creator of the universe. I mean, there is a creator, there is a personal God, and he occasionally writes books. He doesn't code software, he doesn't produce films. Mel Gibson's claim to have been toiling all the while under the influence of the Holy Spirit, I think, is probably an exception here. But Peter, why can't you do the same thing? Why can't you attack the philosophical underpinnings of medicine the same way? Mm-hmm. If you're continually vomiting, you should go to the doctor and get X, Y, and Z. But that just assumes you don't want to continually vomit.
Yeah, it does, exactly.
What about the person who wants to continually vomit?
But that's an assumption. I mean, your example was, if I want to live longer, then I should do it. But not everybody does want to live longer. Right?
But that's shorthand for a whole suite of concerns that everyone recognizes are the only intelligible discussion about human health. And now if we can find one person who says, listen, I like vomiting, I like continuous pain, and I'd like to die tomorrow, he's not offering an alternate medical, health-based worldview that we have to take seriously. He just doesn't get invited back to the conference about medicine.
But
so it could be with the conference on morality. That's all. But look, the Catholic Church. Another problem with accepting a label is that we are consenting to be thought of as a marginal interest group. We're consenting to be thought of as a cranky subculture that meets in hotel ballrooms. I mean, there are things that you and I might not be comfortable with the first time we consider them, that we can get comfortable with by thinking it through or imagining things from other people's perspectives.
Or at the very least that we think are immoral but still think that we have no business in doing anything about. Right?
Yeah, and ultimately there are cases of kind of moral dumbfounding where you would have to admit that it's moral in the sense that you can't point to a victim, right? And
right, Jonathan Haidt talks about experiments like this, somebody who's having sex with a dead chicken.
But it still disgusts you. I mean, to take it out of the moral sphere for a second, if I told you, well, I have Jeffrey Dahmer's sweater, it's been dry cleaned. Would you like to? Would you try it on? Right now, everyone recoils from that, right? But it's not. If you actually think about it, it's not something that, there's kind of a magical superstition intruding there, where you think
Right.
it's something that's been deposited in the sweater, even though, we dry cleaned it, 450 times, right? So it's, and if maybe a sweater is too charged, but to take something where there would be absolutely no question that
Hitler's
his DNA,
harmonica.
it's not covered with this creepy guy's DNA. It's something that you just, in order to recoil from it, you are thinking superstitiously, right?
The problem isn't fundamentalism, which we often hear this said. These are euphemisms. I mean, the only problem with Islamic fundamentalism are the fundamentals of Islam.
If we enjoy some great professional success, this remains vivid and intoxicating to us for about an hour, maybe a day. But then people begin to ask you, well, what are you going to do next? Don't you have something in the pipeline? Steve Jobs releases the iPhone. I'm sure it wasn't 20 minutes before someone came up to him and said, when are you going to make this thing smaller? Now, notice at this juncture, very few people say, oh, I'm done. I've met all my goals, and now I'm just going to stay here and eat ice cream until I die in front of you. But Satya Sai Baba is not a fringe figure. He's not the David Koresh of Hinduism. His followers threw a birthday party for him recently, and 1 million people showed up. So there are vast numbers of people who believe he is a living God. You can even watch his miracles on YouTube. Prepare to be underwhelmed. It's true that he has an afro of sufficient diameter as to suggest a total detachment from the opinions of his fellow human beings, but I'm not sure this is reason enough to worship him.
And this is something we actually will face. I mean, we will get drugs that can really, for instance, take away grief. I think at some point in the lifetime of someone in this room, there will be an antidote to sadness. So that when your wife dies and you're inconsolable, there will be a pill you can take that will take that feeling away. Now the question is, when do you want to take it? You want to take it 15 minutes after she dies? You want to take it a month after? You want to take it a year after? You want to take it before she dies so that you'll be indifferent to her dying? I mean, these are real ethical problems.
Yes, but the utility argument, though, is separate from the truth argument. I mean, to say that religion is useful is not at all to say that it is true. Okay, and so we as scientists, we're in the truth business. We're not in the useful delusion business. I mean, I could invent a religion right now that I guarantee you would be more useful than any religion on offer. And if we could spread it to billions, we would live in a better world, and this religion would be transparently false to everyone in this room. It would be a lie. I mean, here's the religion. Help people to the best of your ability. Don't lie, cheat, or steal. And here's where it gets novel. Raise your children to value science and mathematics and excel in these areas as best as they can. And if you don't do this, you will be tortured after death by a 17-headed demon named Phyllis. Okay. Now, if we could spread this all over the world, if we could replace Islam with this faith, we would live in a better world. Absolutely. Okay. Does that lend the slightest credence to the idea that this demon named Phyllis exists? No. So we have to talk like this as scientists.
Now,